Hello, friends. Welcome. It is monthly reading wrap-up time. I'm a little late on this. Last weekend was pretty hectic. Halloween festivities kicked off. But August reading wrap-up, September TBR. Let's get straight into it. So for my August TBR, I did things a little differently because it was my birthday month. So as you can see behind me, I have the IKEA cube things, and I use that as my bookshelf. But I have so many books on my physical TBR because I have a couple book box subscription services and have had multiple in the past, so I've always had quite an influx of books coming in, and I haven't been able to get to them as fast as they come in, unfortunately. So for August, I really wanted to try and get through as many of these as I possibly could. So I had my husband actually go through and pick a book from each cube, and that was my TBR for the month. That was pretty much everything I had on my TBR. I didn't select any audiobooks, and then I am doing a reread of the Raven Cycle series, so that was my digital TBR, was just reading however many of those I ended up getting through. So it was a pretty loose TBR as far as everything except my physical books, and I am proud to say that I kicked 5 books off of my physical TBR, which is way more than I usually get through in a month. One of them was a DNF, but I actually read 4 of them all the way through. And then I read 2 other additional books that weren't from my physical TBR. One of them was a digital book, and then one of them was a new edition that hadn't been on my physical TBR previously. So in total, in August, I read 6 books and DNF'd 1. So let's get into it. All right, first up was my digital read of the month, which was The Raven Boys. I ended up finishing this one at the very beginning of August because I started off in July. This is the first book in the Raven Cycle. Like I said, I'm rereading that. I read it for the first time a couple years after the last book came out in 2018. But I'm rereading that because when I initially read it, I told my husband that I thought he would love it, and it's been so many years since I read it, so he's finally getting around to reading them. And so I'm doing a reread along with him so that I can kind of refresh myself while he's having live reactions to the books. So I read that first one. I'm not going to be re-reviewing them really or re-rating them, since I kind of already did my initial rating when I read them the first time. And so far I'm on the 3rd one now, even though I only finished one of them in August. My thoughts haven't changed a ton. I do want to say I remembered, for some reason, when I read the series the first time, the first book was my least favorite, I think. Either the first or the 3rd, but I don't think that's true anymore, just with how I'm reading them. Initially, I rated this one 4 stars, and I think that's pretty true to how I feel still. I think it's a good book, but I think it has a couple of issues, but that's pretty much true of the whole series, I think. But yeah, I'm really enjoying the reread so far. I don't want to talk too much about it since it is a reread and it's not a fresh review. If you've never heard of these books before, they're about a group of boys who go to this really high-end rich prep school in Virginia, and they cross paths with this girl named Blue, and she is the daughter of a psychic, and her mom's friends and family are all psychics as well, but Blue isn't, and she just amplifies other energies and abilities. And so she crosses paths with these boys, and the leader of this group of boys that goes to prep school is on a quest or a mission to find Glendower, who was a Welsh prince, kind of in the vein of Arthurian legend kind of vibes. So he's searching for this Welsh prince that he believes is still alive and was transported from Wales to America to Virginia, and is in a magical sleep on one of the ley lines that goes through Virginia. So that's kind of the premise of the entire series. I think it's really fun, and it is quite dramatic at times. I do really enjoy the way that their relationships are explored throughout the series. There's a lot of really interesting dynamics within this group, and a lot of explorations of jealousy in all of its forms, which I quite enjoy. But yeah, highly recommend. It's one of my favorite series, and I really enjoyed it the first time I read it, and I'm really enjoying this reread as well. While I'm on the subject of the Raven cycle series, I'm going to jump quickly out of order of how I actually read these books. This was actually my second to last read, but the graphic novel adaptation version of the first book came out in August, and so we got that, and I read that at the very end of the month, just like in a day, to kind of compare to the regular version since I just read it. And I gave that one 3.5 stars. I did like the art a lot, and I think they did a generally pretty good job of capturing the story, but there was a lot of the like relationship dynamics, and also these books, there is kind of a theme of exploring the humanity in all of the villains that are in the series, and that was significantly cut out of the graphic novel. So I definitely recommend reading the novel version for sure, because I think there's a lot more intricacy in it, but I do think the graphic novel adaptation was pretty good, but I did really miss that they cut out that entire characterization thing that they do, and there was a lot of like more meaningful moments that don't really mean as much in the first book, but kind of like come back in the other books that were cut out of the first book, or as well in the graphic novel. So like I said, I did think the graphic novel adaptation was good, but they definitely had to cut some stuff out to make it work. So didn't like it as much as the original novel version. All right, back in order. The next book that I read was The Eyes Are the Best Part, which is a horror novel about a Chinese American girl. She is going to college, and her father just left their family, and her mother starts dating this new man, and she becomes fascinated and obsessed with his eyes because he's white and he has blue eyes, and she kind of develops this weird obsession with them and kind of the ways that they represent sexism and racism that she's experiencing kind of just like in her everyday life. And the story proceeds from there as she just becomes more and more fascinated with blue eyes in general and does some unsavory things in order to get a taste of them. So that is that one, the description anyways. I enjoyed this book quite a lot. I ended up giving it 4 stars. I do think I had some issues with the ending of the book. The way that the ending is done, they like try to explain away stuff, but then also fully embrace it at the same time. And I think it's a little bit disjointed at the end. And I wish it was a little bit cleaner in the way that we were trying to like explain away this obsession while also saying that it's still a valid thing that she's done. So it was kind of just like a disjointed ending a little bit. Which I didn't love. And then there was some things that I wanted to be explored a little more. The main character has a pretty fraught relationship with her mother, and her relationship with her sister kind of goes through turmoil throughout the book. She kind of gets more and more fed up with her younger sister when I don't necessarily think it's justified, but also part of other stuff going on, and it's a fine reaction to have to all of the other things that are going on in her life. But there wasn't really any like true resolution to either of those relationships at the end, which I felt we were missing out on quite a bit. So I think this was a really, really good debut, and I'm definitely excited to see what else this author does in the future. And I think the horror elements were really, really well done. I just think some of the more literary aspects of this, especially the character relationships, weren't as explored as I wanted them to be in the end. So that's that one. I don't think I have too much else to say. There was some really, really beautiful lines in this book, though. I think the writing style really worked for me. It was just those kind of like wrapping things up at the end didn't go quite as cleanly as I wanted it to go. So 4 stars for that one. Next up, I read The Luminaries by Susan Dennard, and this is it's a YA fantasy book, and it's set kind of in our world, but in a hidden part of our world. There's these different groups that have popped up all over the world, and they are protecting the world from this like unknown force that creates monsters every night in various forests. It's kind of not super explained how these started happening, because they talk about a lot in the book that this one is the American one, and they're like, oh, this is the newest one. Like, this creature that creates all of these other creatures that come to life at night is the newest one, and it doesn't act quite like the other ones, but they don't really know why. But we never like meet that creature because it is asleep, I believe. And so it's kind of a little bit confusing how the world started. But there is one girl that lives in this society, and her father, like many, many years ago, was discovered as being like a secret agent for the bad guys. So her dad ran away and managed to escape from them. And then her whole family was like outcast in society, because they were like, how could you not know that this person that you let into our community was actually a spy and working for the people that we're fighting against? So that's where the book kicks off. And our main girl, she is preparing. The story is like, once you turn a certain age, the month of your birthday, you can compete in these trials to become one of these hunters that hunts the creatures that awaken every night in the forest. And so she decides that even though she's an outcast, she's going to try and do these trials. And she gets into the first one and realizes that she is very underprepared, but she still manages to make it through the first trial and teams up with her kind of estranged childhood best friend to train and get through the rest of these trials so that she can hopefully get her family out of being outcasts and kind of like restore their family to the previously held position that they had. So this book kind of just follows her as she's training and learning more about the society and what her father was actually doing, and also follow her through these 3 different trials that she needs to pass in order to become one of these hunters. As far as how I felt about this book, I think my feelings about this book are very conflicting. I really enjoyed the characters. I thought that the relationships between the characters were quite well explored, and I really liked how those developed. I think overall the plot was pretty good. I did have some problems with the amount of plot that we had in this book versus how much this book was setting up the rest of the series. There's a lot of stuff introduced in this book that is not explored at all and is kind of like pushed off for the other books, which is okay, but I wish we would have had a little bit more closure at the end of this book. This book didn't really like solve any of the questions that it posed in the plot. It just got through to the end of the trials, essentially. I assume that we're going to actually find all of the answers to those questions in the rest of the series, but I just didn't like how little of the questions were answered. So that was one of my complaints about the book. But overall, besides that, I liked the plot of this book pretty well. I think the trials were pretty interesting, and I think like the descriptions of all of the trials and of the forest were really good. I really, really loved the forest lore. All of these creatures that are in the forest are kind of creatures, like horror creatures that we would see in regular media. Like there's a take on vampires and a take on werewolves and a take on like sirens and mermaids, but they're kind of different and altered from our typical stories. So I thought the way that those were done were really cool. There's also, I'm not sure if this is in the regular version also, or if it's just my edition, because I have a special edition of this from a book box. There was like art of the different creatures that our main character was fighting in the book. Those were really, really beautiful, and I loved them. They're like little journal entries, basically, of kind of like what the creatures are and what their weaknesses are and what their like objective is usually. So I thought those were really, really cool and added to the world a lot. So really loved all of the lore and world building around the forest specifically. But my biggest issue with this book was the world building of how this society exists within our actual world. That was not explained at all, really. And when it was explained, it just left me with more questions. There was one page that I just like fully stopped the book, and I annotate most of my physical books. So I like wrote, it's like a whole page of me just being like, this thing and this thing and this thing and this thing about how this society exists in our world is so confusing and doesn't make any sense at all. And I don't think the author really thought about the logistics of how the society exists in our world, other than just like plopping the society in because she wanted to write about it. So that was my other really, really big complaint about this book. And that's most of the reason that I gave this book 3 stars. I think if it had been explained better how this society actually functions in our world, then this book probably would have gotten like 4 stars. Like I easily docked a star just for how much the world building of this society didn't make sense at all. So overall, I really liked the characters and the like world building within the forest, but not the world building outside of the forest as much. And I'm not sure, I haven't really decided yet whether I'm going to continue this series. I already know for sure how one of these plot points ends. It's not like subtle at all at hinting what is going on. But there is a couple of other plot points that I'm quite curious about. I'm not sure. We'll see. I'll ruminate on it a bit more and figure out if I actually want to continue this series or not. But that is the Luminaries. Next up, I read When Among Crows by Veronica Roth, and this was definitely my favorite book of the month. I loved this book. It is a novella, so it's quite short. It's under 200 pages, but I just adored this book. This is a book, it's kind of a twist on Slavic folklore, and like a bunch of the different creatures and monsters in Slavic folklore are living in Chicago in this like hidden world and have these different establishments set up in order to be able to live in society. And one of our main characters is one of these creatures, and one of the other main characters, he comes to Chicago looking for one of these creatures specifically. And so they kind of team up and go to all of these different other creatures and their establishments to try and find their way there. And I don't want to give too much away because I feel like, I'm not sure if it's in the synopsis or not, but there is kind of like a couple of twists in there, even though it is such a short book. So I don't know how to describe the book much more than that. But really, really good. The writing in this was really good. I loved the way that the Slavic folklore was incorporated. It kind of is just like tucked in and not explained too much, which I know some people might have an issue with, but I actually really enjoyed because it is something that I can look up if I don't know like what a creature is, or if I can't pick up on the hints in the book. I could just look it up. My issue with world building usually is when people are creating a secondary world and don't explain things, and I couldn't look it up for myself if I had questions. But since this book is based in reality, and I figured out most of the creatures and everything in this book through like the context of this book, I thought it was done really, really well. And I absolutely adored the characters in this book. The way that their relationships develop and change within such a short time span is really, really beautiful. And I just also really loved the themes that are explored in this book. This book deals a lot with like indoctrination and breaking free of that indoctrination. And I also think that the like ending was really, really beautiful. I really loved the ending of this book. So yeah, I just really loved everything about it, and I very highly recommend, and I'm definitely going to be reading the sequel for this one. And I'm really excited to get to that. So very glad that I picked this up this month. Okay, and then the last book that I actually ended up finishing in August was Gideon the Ninth. I've had this on my TBR for so long, and I've only heard like the best things about it. And so it was very highly anticipated for me, and it did not fail to meet my expectations. I did end up giving it 4.5 instead of 5 stars, just because I think the pacing in the first half of the book is a little slow for me personally. So I didn't have a ton of like intrigue in the first half of the book because I was kind of just like waiting for things to pick up. But then once they picked up, I was strapped in and ready to go. It was so good. The character work in this is incredible. I'm so excited to see where the rest of the series goes. And And we still don't even have a release date for the last book, which is so sad. I want to know when it's coming out so that I can like space these out and not have to wait for forever once I get to the last book. But we'll see how long I can hold off on reading the second book, because I'm really so excited to see where the rest of the series goes. I will say that from every time that anyone's ever talked about this book, no one really has ever like explained the premise in any videos I've ever seen recommending this book. So quick rundown on what this book is, in case you've never heard of it, or just like me have only been like people telling you, oh, it's lesbian necromancers in space, and that's like the only thing that you know about it. This book is that, but it is about our main character, Gideon. She lives on this planet, which is the ninth house. And the planets in this world all are ruled by necromancers. And then the necromancers each have like different specialties in the different houses, which are the different planets. And the emperor is like this immortal necromancer being, and he kind of calls all of them to the planet that he came from that is no longer really inhabited, and asks them all to try and pass these trials in order to also become immortalized and become necromancers that can live forever. So that's what happens. Gideon kind of gets sucked into this whole trial kind of against her will, and goes with the necromancer that rules her planet to try and compete in these trials and solve this mystery. So it does end up kind of being in the second half like a bit of a murder mystery kind of thing, but much more involved than that, I will say. But I really, really enjoyed it. I loved the characters in this. Again, I think the world building is super, super interesting, and I'm so excited to learn more about the world, and especially about like the emperor and how that all works. And I think that Gideon is a fantastic character. I love her so much. And also, I think that the way that the story is kind of like plotted and everything is really, really good. Like I said, my only like really minor issue was just the pacing in the first half of the book, but everything else about this book was perfect to me. I really loved it. So that is Gideon the Ninth. And then the last book I have to talk about is the book that I DNF'd, and this was The Kingdom of Back by Marie Lu. And this is a historical fantasy book. I DNF'd this at like 68% because I was just like, honestly so bored. This is also like not the style of book that I would typically pick up on my own. I wouldn't like choose this book to buy if I was the one doing it, but I got it in a book box a long time ago. The premise of this book is we're following Mozart's like not famous older sister, and there is like a fantasy element to this where there's this other world that her and Mozart travel to that is like very fairy-esque with like lots of fairy rules and stuff like that. But at the 68% mark that I left off, I was just like, nothing had really happened. It was just a lot of like internal conflict from the main character. I think the themes are fine. It's a lot of exploring about like the way that women were treated in society at that time, and how she wasn't really allowed to be as famous as her younger brother because she was a woman, and the expectation was kind of always like, oh, you're going to stop being a musician and just live as a woman in society and get married. So I thought those themes were being explored fine, but I did have a really weird feeling about how much we were extrapolating this like real life person's feelings and putting like today's societal standards and interpretations on this very real person's life. It was just very weird to me. I don't really love when historical books do that. I would rather have a historical book where our main character is imagined and maybe interacts with real life historical people. I think trying to write a character that's so based on a real person and just like pretending like we knew their feelings is a bit strange, and I don't love that. ever. And so this book also had that working against it, that I was like, it feels very weird that we're like acting like we knew how these siblings actually interacted with each other, or how this real life woman actually felt about like all of her life. I'm sure the author did a fine amount of research on what this person actually like talked about and everything, but there is still such a level of our own feelings that we have to put onto a real life person that it is a bit weird to me. And I don't love that. And then again, in addition to that, I felt like nothing had happened in the story at like almost 70%. And so I just decided it was not the book for me and I was not going to continue it anymore. So that is the book that I DNF'd in August. Okay, on to my September TBR. A lot of this is lots of fall books and horror books, because in the fall season, there is pretty much like 4 categories of books I want to read. There's horror books. Obviously, I'm a big horror person in general. So every second after my birthday is over through the end of October is Halloween to me. So definitely lots of horror. I also really love reading fantasy in the fall for some reason. I'm not as much of a like summer fantasy person. I usually get wandering mind during the summer, but in the fall I'm like ready to lock in and be full fantasy. And then I like reading pretty much anything that has anything academia in it. I'm not limiting that to dark academia, just like anything that has like a school setting or academia in it at all. I really enjoy in the fall, and then I really, really also love folklore and fairy tales in the fall. So that is pretty much what I'm going to be reading during this fall as well. So a lot of the books on my September TBR fall into those categories. I'll go over my digital books first because they're pretty simple. I'm just going to keep reading The Raven Cycle. I did read most of The Dream Thieves, which is the second book, in August, but I didn't actually finish it in August. I have finished it at this point, but I didn't finish it in August. So that was technically on my September TBR. And then Blue Lily, Lily Blue, which is the next book in that series I'm currently reading. So I'm also going to get through that in September. I'm not sure if we'll be able to finish that and finish The Raven King by the end of the month. Probably not. I'll probably just finish Blue Lily, Lily Blue, and then read The Raven King in October. But that's my digital books. And then for audiobooks, I'm reading 2 books off of my 25 and 2025 because I've been severely slacking on that. So I'm reading The Salt Grows Heavy by Cassandra Khaw. So the synopsis for that is, you may think you know how the fairy tale goes. A mermaid comes to shore and weds the prince. But what the fables forget is that mermaids have teeth, and now her daughters have devoured the kingdom and burned it to ash. On the run, the mermaid is joined by a mysterious plague doctor with a darkness of their own. Deep in the eerie, snow-crusted forest, the pair stumble upon a village of ageless children who thirst for blood, and the 3 saints who control them. The mermaid and her doctor must embrace the cruelest parts of their true nature if they hope to survive. So that is the first audiobook that I'm planning to read in September. I probably wouldn't have picked this up if it wasn't on my 25 and 2025 already, because I read Nothing by Blackened Teeth, which is Cassandra Khaw's debut work, and I didn't really love that. But this has much more of a like fairy tale vibe to it, so I'm hoping that I enjoy it a bit more because I am always a sucker for a reimagined fairy tale. And then the other audiobook that I'm planning to read this month is We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. I read The Haunting of Hill House a couple of years ago and really, really liked it. And so I've kind of been like incorporating Shirley Jackson's works more into my regular reading, even though I do tend to have a hard time like incorporating older works into my reading just regularly. So I threw this on my 25 and 2025 to motivate me to like incorporate it in instead of just being blinded by new releases. So I am planning to listen to the audiobook for this month. I'll read whatever synopsis I have for this, but I mostly am just putting it on my TBR because Shirley Jackson. So the synopsis for this one. Taking readers into a labyrinth of dark neurosis, We Have Always Lived in the Castle is a deliciously unsettling novel about a perverse, isolated, and possibly murderous family and the struggle that ensues when a cousin arrives at their estate. This is blah blah blah. Yeah, the rest of this is just like, this is a classic. But I don't know too much about this book other than like a lot of people really, really love this one and think it's Shirley Jackson's best. So that is the other book that I'm planning to read on audio. And then for my physical TBR, I am mixing in a bit of series and then also a bit of horror. The first book on my physical TBR, I actually technically already finished, but we're not going to talk about that, is The Jasad Crown. This is the sequel to the Jasad Heir. I'm not going to read the synopsis for this because I don't want to give any spoilers for the Jasad Heir. But the Jasad Heir follows a girl who is secretly an heir to this country called Jasad. And she's in hiding because her country and all of the people that live in her country are like the only people that have magic left in this world. And her country and the monarchy in it got destroyed and no one lives there anymore, and all of the Jasadi people kind of just live in the regular world and hide their magic because people hunt them pretty vigorously because they are afraid of magic madness and afraid that these people are the only people in the world that have magic anymore. So she's in hiding, but she is stumbled upon by the heir of the kingdom that is kind of in charge of hunting down and controlling magic. And he selects her to be his champion in this trial that happens every year. So she agrees to help him because at the end she's going to get like riches and whatever she wants, and she'll be able to just like continue living, hiding successfully. He does not know that she is the Jasad heir. He just knows that she is Jasadi and that she'll benefit from winning this challenge. And he is trying to just like find out information about the other kingdoms that are also competing in this trial. So that's the premise of the book. The first book is really incredible, and so this book just came out in July, and I was really, really excited to get to it, so I knew I had to get to it in September, and I've actually already finished it, and it was incredible, and I haven't stopped thinking about it since, but that is the first physical book on my September TBR. The other fantasy book that I'm planning to read in September is also coming off of my 25 and 2025, and that is Celestial Monsters by Aiden Thomas. This is the sequel to the Sunbearer Trials, and I really loved the first book. Really excited to dive into the second one. Again, I'm not going to read the synopsis for the second one because I don't want to give any spoilers for the first one, but actually kind of a lot of trial stuff I've been reading recently because the premise of the Sunbearer Trials is that there is a group of these kids to these, basically they're like gods. The kids of these gods are selected to compete in these trials, and the winner and the loser end up having to participate in this ritual in order to keep monsters out of the world, basically. And our main character accidentally gets selected for these trials. He was definitely not expecting it and feels woefully underprepared. And a lot of the other kind of like heirs and kids of the gods kind of make fun of him and look down on him. So it's another trial book, but the world in that is really, really cool, and I loved it a lot. And the cliffhanger was really so I'm really excited to get to the second one and finish that series out. We're working on finishing out a lot of series this month. Then the next book on my physical TBR, which I started, I just have the sleeve. The book is elsewhere because I always take the dust jacket off. But The Possession of Alba Diaz. This is by Isabel Canas, and I've read both of her other books, The Hacienda and Vampires of El Norte, and they're both incredible, and this was one of my most highly anticipated releases of the year. I pre-ordered this way before it came out, so I'm going to get around to this month. The synopsis for this one, because it's completely unrelated to the other works, it's just a standalone. The synopsis for this one, with my weird dust jacket, In 1765, plague sweeps through Zacatecas. Alba flees with her wealthy merchant parents and fiancé Carlos to his family's isolated mine for refuge, but safety proves fleeting as other dangers soon bare their teeth. Alba begins suffering from strange hallucinations, sleepwalking, and violent convulsions. She senses something cold lurking beneath her skin, something angry, something wrong. Elias, haunted by a troubled past, came to the New World to make his fortune and escape his family's legacy of greed. Alba, as his cousin's betrothed, is none of his business, which is, of course, why he can't help but notice the growing tension between them every time she enters the room, and why he notices her deteriorate when the demon's thirst for blood gets stronger. In the fight for her life, Alba and Elias become entangled with the occult, the church, long-kept secrets, and each other, not knowing that one of these things will spell their doom. So, very, very excited for this. Isabel Canas is the master of intersecting romance and horror, and I'm sure that this book will be no different, and I'm so excited to get to it. And then the last book on my physical TBR this month is Our Share of Nights. I have actually already started this. This was a book that I had soft DNF'd previously just because I started it last summer, and summer is very much my lowest reading period. I usually get sucked into other hobbies and activities a lot in the summer. And I started this and I just was not in the mood for it. And also this book doesn't have chapters, which I'm a sucker for chapters. So that was a little bit hard for me, but it was really good, the amount that I did read, which was not a ton. So I'm really excited to dive back into this when it is fall and I'm a little bit more in the mood for it to kind of hunker down and read a longer book and also not care as much about there not being chapters. So the synopsis for this one is: a young father and son set out on a road trip, devastated by the death of the wife and mother they both loved. United in grief, the pair travel to her ancestral home where they must confront the terrifying legacy she has bequeathed, a family called the Order that commits unspeakable acts in search of immortality. Moving back and forth in time from London in the swinging 1960s to the brutal years of Argentina's military dictatorship and its turbulent aftermath, Our Share of Night is a novel like no other, a family story, a ghost story, a story of the occult and the supernatural, a book about the complexities of love and longing with queer subplots and themes. This is the masterwork of one of Latin America's most original novelists. So, that is Our Share of Night. I'm really excited to get back to this. I really loved the amount that I did read last summer, and very much in the vibe for fall horror and longer. So, definitely going to be getting into that one this September. And that is all I have. That is all the books that I read in August. My quite long September TBR. We'll see if I can get through it all. I'm hopeful based on how quickly I've been reading so far this month. But yeah, that's all I have for you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.